Why, hello there. Welcome to the Saturn Junkyard. I am a Virtua Schlub, and today we will be talking about... actually, I'm not sure what we're talking about. Do I ever know what I'm talking about? Oh well, let's see how it goes. So I recently picked up a Rhea, which is a disk drive replacement for the Sega Saturn. However, rather than loading games off of CDs using the original optical media drive, it instead lets you load games off of an SD card. Now the Rheas have existed for a while. I think they started producing them a few years ago. But even as of the recording of this video, March 2018, they're still very difficult to come by. And so I have been looking for one for quite some time, and I feel really fortunate to have gotten the opportunity to pick one up. But for the purposes of this video, I wanted to share a little bit more about what it does, some of my impressions, maybe a few tips that I would have for anybody who's thinking about picking one up soon or may have recently done so. But I'm probably not going to get too much into the weeds or the finer details of the process for installation and setting it up and troubleshooting and any of that. I will, however, include a few links in the description to some of those sources, which can be pretty helpful if that's the kind of information you're looking for. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to try to keep things a little more conceptual and talk a little bit more broadly about just the Rhea and what value that innovations like it have for the Saturn community. There's also an alternative version called Phoebe, and as far as I can tell, I believe the Rhea and Phoebe function more or less identically. The main difference is that the Rhea would be compatible with consoles that have a 20-pin connection, whereas the Phoebe would be used if your console had a 21-pin connection. Unfortunately, I don't think it's super straightforward to be able to determine which one you would need just by the outside characteristics of your console alone. I could be wrong, but I think you would want to open up the console and look at the insides to be able to tell for sure whether you would want a Rhea or a Phoebe for your particular console. The good news in that is that the producer on their website has a pretty good in-depth guide that shows you exactly what you should be looking for to help make that determination. But I just wanted to mention that as a pretty major caveat for anybody who's interested in going down this rabbit hole. But for this video, just because I have a Rhea and I probably will never get a Phoebe, I'm just going to be talking about the Rhea. But just know that at least conceptually, I think most of what I'm going to talk about will apply to both devices. So there you go. There are a few other caveats I wanted to make sure to mention beyond the whole pin and Rhea Phoebe version issue. The major one is that these, as I alluded to earlier, both the Rhea and Phoebe are still very difficult to come by, at least as of this recording in March 2018. I really hope that changes, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that if this is something that you are interested in picking up, supply is still very much limited, and I really don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. As far as I know, it's really just one person who makes all of these units, all of the Rheas, all of the Phoebes, and also all of the GDEMUs, which is the Dreamcast version of the disk drive replacement and SD card reader. If you're interested in picking one up, there are a couple of different routes you could try at this point, although neither is assured. If you go the eBay direction, there aren't usually a lot of listings for Rheas or Phoebes. Sometimes they pop up, but usually if I see them at all, they'll be included with the system, so it'll be pre-installed and usually those carry a pretty hefty markup from what I've seen. So if you really want one, that is a possibility, as they do pop up from time to time. But there just aren't a ton of them, even with the inflated prices there. The other way you could do this, and this is probably my suggestion, if you're patient, is to just follow the manufacturer's website as closely as you can. I'm not sure all of the different channels, social media that they announce this stuff in, but a lot of times I have seen that they'll pre-announce when they have new batches of Rheas or Phoebes or GDEMUs on the horizon. So it's worth paying close attention to those announcements to really get the best chance of being able to get one of these units for yourself. And again, I'll include all of that information to the GDEMU website in the show notes. Overall, it's worked like a charm. I think it's pretty much everything that it was cracked up to be, and it works exactly as advertised. One of the things I really like about it is just the convenience factor. It makes it really easy to access your whole backed up library on one SD card with great ease. Like there's a menu program you can install, and it's really easy to cycle in and out of games and play different games without turning off the console or doing anything. You can just soft reset, go back to the menu, and pick a new game if you want to. So it's really intuitive and really easy to use from that standpoint. For now, I would really like to take a step back and talk more broadly about the greater importance of innovations like the Rhea, and certainly not just limiting it to the Rhea and Phoebe. Throughout the last few years, we've seen a great number of innovations from the community that really will play a massive role in continuing to preserve the Saturn going forward. And certainly something we've been learning the hard way is that, the Saturn, at least in its physical manifestations that we've grown up with, or that we've come to know and rely on, they're not going to last forever, both on the hardware side and the disk side. There will be a time where all of this stuff will cease to work. And in order to maintain not just the status quo of preserving what we have now, or at least the level of interest that the Saturn currently has, to ensure that the system is accessible for more people in the future, and that we can continue to grow and sustain the community of passionate fans that have currently amassed behind this banner. We really need to start relying less on the original hardware and think more about those long-term solutions and what they will look like for future-proofing our ability to play Saturn games at all, let alone in their original iterations. Unfortunately, many of us in the community are learning firsthand of the finite nature that the Saturn hardware and games are up against as challenges towards maintaining them and enjoying them in the future. Now, even this console, the hard drive started to go out, so that's pretty much the reason why I was prompted to seek a solution like the Rhea in the first place. The other side of this is the software and the failure thereof, because among the Saturn contingent and many of us in the community, we are already experiencing a tremendous amount of failure among the optical media that we've come to rely on over the last 20-something plus years. I just, it's very unfortunate when so many people can take the utmost care to keep their discs pristine, to keep them sealed, or at least out of the elements, to keep them in their original packaging and away from potential situations where they would exacerbate their already frail state. But despite that, these discs are failing anyway. And so that prompts us to really need to look around and see what can we do to make sure we can continue to play these games. And a huge breakthrough in that, of course, was the Pseudo Saturn, where you can at least back up your discs, and you can at least burn new ones, or burn those games on new discs, and that's been a massive breakthrough for the community. And I think it's probably the most single important contribution that we've seen so far. And the Rhea is also probably for the hardware side could potentially have a similar impact. But the problem is that it's just not accessible to most people. My biggest hope for the future is that the production of the Rhea and Phoebe and chips like it can increase as soon as possible to meet that demand and to meet that future demand, to make sure that more people are able to preserve their consoles and future-proof their Saturns in the same way. This has the potential to be as important of a breakthrough as a Pseudo Saturn and some of those other innovations we've seen over the last few years. But until we reach a critical mass with the availability of the device, we're not going to get there. And we're kind of racing against time as more systems fail, as more original games fail, particularly when a lot of those games are $200, $300, $500 and more than that for a lot of the most rarest ones. And so any innovations or efforts to make things like the Rhea more accessible to as many people as possible, we can only benefit from that in this community. Well, shit, that got pretty dark pretty fast. Honestly, I didn't intend for this video to quite go down that path, or at least not nearly to the extent that it did. Really, I just want to underscore that overall, these innovations like the Rhea and Phoebe and Pseudo Saturn and even fan translations of games that traditionally weren't available to Western or English-speaking audiences, these have all represented massive leaps already towards the future preservation of the Saturn, of its games, of the enjoyment of those of us who currently play them and grew up with them or newly discovered them, and also improve the accessibility for people who may start playing the Saturn in the future. These innovations have really transformed the community already in a way that I don't think I could have foreseen 10 years ago, or even a lot more recent than that. Okay, so to wrap this all up and to maybe get back a little bit to the original topic of the video, which honestly, who the hell knows what that was at this point. Yeah, the Rhea is fantastic. It is just, it works every bit as advertised. Honestly, the convenience factor alone makes it worth it, of just being able to house all of my games in one place, on one SD card, on my system, and to be able to easily access them and play them on original hardware. That carries just an incredible amount of value. But even more valuable is the peace of mind that it offers. For me, knowing that if something happens to my disk drives in the hardware, or other, or my collection, my discs, that I will still be able to continue to enjoy those Saturn games going forward. And in my mind, I think that just makes it all the more urgent that that innovations like the Rhea and Phoebe and disk drive replacements specifically become more readily available and accessible to the community. At the end of the day, the goal and the purpose that these devices serve is to make the games we play more accessible to us and to others, and to continue to allow us to enjoy them long after they've shed their mortal coils of the optical media that they were originally based on. So the sooner that we can get that technology into the hands of those who would benefit most from it, you know, the better off we'll be as a community, and the more likely we'll be to sustain it in the future. All right, so that's all I got. Bottom line, the Rhea is fantastic. We need more of them. There's also an alternative version called Phoebe. And the Rhea and Phoebe, as far as I know, they pretty much do the same thing. I see what they did there. Rhea, Phoebe, oh my gosh. How did I not get that before? Okay, obviously, this is a Friends reference. Rhea, Rachel, Phoebe. Oh man. Way to go, guys. Very clever. So I recently got a Rhea, which is a dick driver. All right.